Nearing the conclusion of their OTAs, the Seahawks had their final open practice of the offseason today at the VMAC. What went down and what did Ryan Grubb and the coordinators had to say coming out of the final open media session? We'll be breaking it all down here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Whether you're listening in the land of the VMAC in Renton, Washington, or if you're across the country in St. Louis, Missouri, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. The Seahawks have officially wrapped up their open OTA practices. They've now had 7 of their 10. The next time the media will get to meet with the Seahawks on the field will be during mandatory minicamp next week, which will be happening Tuesday through Thursday. We're obviously going to have some awesome content here on the podcast as veteran minicamp is underway at the VMAC. But a lot to unpack today. All 3 coordinators for the Seahawks speaking with the media. We'll dive into some of the key takeaways coming out of the last open media session in OTAs. Then we'll have our Monday mailbag. And DK Metcalf, is his future impacted in Seattle by this flurry of mega deals at the receiver position? It's a jam-packed episode brought your way courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. We are nearing the end of OTAs, and unlike some previous seasons, there's been years the Seahawks have made 4 or 5 of these practices available to the media. Only 3 available to the media this year. Today was the last media open session of organized team activities. All 3 coordinators, including Ryan Grubb, had a chance to speak with local media afterward. And so this was kind of an interesting OTA, Rob, from the sense we didn't get to hear from Mike McDonald. We didn't get to hear from any of the players, but all 3 coordinators, vastly different perspectives at this stage of the offseason. And I think we have to start with Ryan Grubb, who hasn't had very much time to work with Geno Smith and Sam Howell, but absolutely love the enthusiasm that he has about his quarterback group today, calling them friggin' awesome. Speaking about Geno Smith and Sam Howell. And, you know, I understand there's coach speak, but I truly believe, and this is based on what I've seen out there. I mean, Geno Smith is slinging the ball around. Sam Howell's looked a lot better, especially the second time that I saw him, had a much better practice. I think this is truly genuine excitement about what these quarterbacks can do in his offense. I don't think this is coach speak.
No, I 100% agree with you, Corbin. The feedback that I was receiving for some of the Seahawks scouts, even before the draft, was that Sam Howell had been looking good, and we all know Geno Smith's accuracy, and so I was confident that Ryan Grubb was going to like the professionalism and the precision that he was going to be seeing from his quarterbacks. But to hear him say it like you just described it, friggin' awesome. I just think is kind of, again, typifying exactly the type of enthusiasm that you want to see from a first-time NFL offensive coordinator and the type of professionalism that he is going to be experiencing at the professional level now that he is working with, quarterbacks or other players of other positions that are men. These aren't young men anymore. You're talking about 18 to 20-year-olds or whatever. They're kind of screwing around in between reps. Geno Smith and Sam Howell, for whatever complaints that some may have about their game, professionalism, attention to detail, work ethic, those have never been anything that anybody has ever uttered about either Geno Smith or Sam Howell. So I think that there's going to be some critics out there, Corbin, who are going to suggest that this is coach speak, that this is a guy that's not used to working with professional quarterbacks. And what else would he say? I don't think that he would have worded it the way that he did. I think that this is very legitimate. I think that Geno Smith is as motivated as as he possibly could be. And I think that Sam Howell is exactly the same way. And I think that the football intelligence that we talked just a couple of days ago with Jim Nagy at the Senior Bowl, he talked about he had seen that with Sam Howell previously. And again, that has been one of the things that has always stood out to me about Geno Smith as well. So I really do think that the enthusiasm that Ryan Grubb is showing or is portraying is basically just mirroring the enthusiasm that his two prize quarterbacks are showing here in VMAC OTA practices.
I think when you dig deeper into the things that he said, it becomes more obvious about how genuine his feelings are about the way these two quarterbacks already are handling his offense. He was talking about Geno Smith and the marriage of his skill set with what they're wanting to do. And this goes back to when they hired him, Rob. We've been talking about Geno Smith having a lot of similarities to Michael Penix Jr. Those two, basically Michael Penix Jr., a lot of the time I was watching Washington film, I felt like maybe not quite as accurate, but there were a lot of things that I was like, is that a left-handed Geno Smith? You saw a lot of very similar things in their game. So it's not surprising that Ryan Grubb referenced that. And with Sam Howell, not a lot of specifics with him, but he mentioned toughness and command of the huddle being the big area that Sam Howell's really grown here over the last few weeks. And anytime you're a new quarterback coming into a new team and you got a new offense on top of it, you're trying to get used to all your teammates. Geno Smith doesn't have to do that. There's so much continuity with the skill players around him, but Sam Howell doesn't have that continuity. He wasn't here last year. So the command of the huddle and being able to handle the leadership, the communication with the offensive line, with the skill players, those are things that Ryan Grubb seems to be prioritizing above all else, which he should be. Those are critical with quarterbacks. So I was really encouraged by that. And I've been in a couple of these OTAs, so I can tell you that both these quarterbacks, particularly Geno Smith, look pretty comfortable in this offense already. So I don't think that this was a coach that was just shooting coach speak here. I think he is really happy so far with what he's seen from these guys. As for the defensive side of the football and special teams, Adam Durde had a chance to speak today, and this didn't surprise me. It was a much different tone than Ryan Grubb talking about the quarterbacks and 50% of the offense installed. Adam Durde was much more reserved, and it makes sense. Defensive coaches this time of year, it's so hard to really make progress because of the rule limitations, the non-contact, things like that. You can't play the football. And so it really is all about the mental reps. And so he is looking at this. I think every answer he gave today, he mentioned the word process. And that's what they're in right now. They are deep in a process where they're trying to get those mental reps, whereas they're not going to be able to get the full-on reps that they need until we get to training camp. The pads come out and some of these rule limitations are pulled. On the flip side, if you want to do a 180, Jay Harbaugh having an absolute blast with the new kickoff rules, trial and error, really two totally different perspectives at this stage. Not that Adam Durde's is wrong or it's bad, but you can clearly tell he's much more reserved, whereas special teams like, hey, let's go. This is going to be a lot of fun figuring this out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to take a step back here for a minute. I think that's what's most important about this entire process, Corbin, is we just kind of illustrate, or explain exactly who was on the field for the Seahawks. And on the defensive side of the ball, focusing on Adam Durde's unit here for a moment, the return of Leonard Williams back onto the field for the Seahawks, I thought was big news in this OTA practice. Quickly on the offensive line, it has been exactly what it has been previously, from starting from left to right. You're going to the left tackle, Charles Cross, the left guard, Laken Tomlinson. The center is Olu Oluwatimi. At the right guard position has been McClendon Curtis, and then at right tackle has been George Fant. And we've been talked about so many times that we had to see the young players kind of work their way back. Abraham Lucas at that right tackle position, how critically important that is. But still, I think it is important to kind of just mention who was actually on the field for the Seahawks in today's practices. Going back to what you mentioned about Adam Durde, I think, again, it's important to kind of acknowledge who was actually there getting the starting reps. There, of course, there's going to be so many eyes at the linebacker position. Tyrell Dodson was not actually practicing, but he was there in person, still kind of soaking up some of that knowledge. But the starting inside linebackers, yet again, were John Radigan. And then from Montana, the
Patrick O'Connell.
Patrick O'Connell, thank you, from Montana. So to me, that is, again, interesting at the linebacker position that the rookie Tyrese Knight continues to run second team. At the same time, I heard that there was a pretty splashy play from Tyrese Knight in coverage coverage in today's practices. So that is encouraging that he is showing his awareness and his speed in terms of coverage. Obviously, a bit of a bugaboo from Seattle's linebackers previously. And I love it, the fact that you mentioned Jay Harbaugh, the special teams coordinator, of course. And one of the things that he said that I really found interesting was just the idea of perhaps we'll see a lot more squib kicks during the deep kickoff, changes that we have seen. And I think that is going to be fascinating about exactly how our team's going to, attack that. How are they going to defend that? And of course, with the new rule, basically once that there is any type of contact, then people can start moving around. I do think that is something that you are going to see happen. And of course, we know that if there is a fumble, if somebody touches that ball, that's a free ball. So it's going to make the kickoffs going to be, I believe, going to be returned to being one of the most exciting plays in all of football.
What I was excited about listening to Jay Harbaugh today, the fact that we could see much different type of players now that are going to be in kick coverage, because I think one of the things with the old setup, you had those long runs downfield. You weren't going to see defensive ends and players like that. Normally, you would not see those guys playing that role. But now, with the players starting on the opposite side of the field and not far apart from the blockers on the other side, I think having long-armed physical guys that can win in short space is actually going to be an advantage for teams, at least having a few guys like that. So just the body types, it isn't limited to the return men. It's also the guys that are going to be blocking, the players that are going to be in kick coverage that are going to be on that side of the field already. You take away that long run, you can have more brute force there trying to stop people. I just think it's going to be really fun, and you could tell that Jay Harbaugh is excited. It's going to be a long process trying to figure out how to best utilize these rules, but there's a lot of excitement about that as we wind down OTAs and head towards the start of training camp. Up next, we're going to tackle your questions, our Monday mailbag segment. Don't go away. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode of Locked On Seahawks is brought your way by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. We actually are in the championship round. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Will the Florida Panthers be able to contain Connor McDavid as they start the Stanley Cup? Will Fernando Tatis Jr. continue breaking out of his slump with a home run for the San Diego Padres? And in the NBA, could we see an upset by the Dallas Mavericks and Luka Doncic scored 30 or more points going up against the Eastern Conference superstars that are the Boston Celtics? You can bet on it all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. It's a normal week. We actually are going to do a Monday mailbag. It feels like this has not happened much since January, but things are starting to stabilize. And, man, we have got some fun questions today from our listeners. First one here for Rob. And this one's coming from Nigel Webb 2151. Are the offensive and defensive lines finally going to be tone setters again? Did we get the bullies in the trenches, or do we still have teddy bears?
I believe that the Seahawks absolutely acquired themselves some bullies along both the offensive and defensive line via this draft and in free agency. I think that the picture that you just had there, Corbin, for those of you watching on YouTube, as Corbin often says, thank you so much, and to our listeners as well, it was a picture of Christian Haynes, and he does have that kind of teddy bear-like kind of belly in the middle. But when you watch this young man on tape, as Corbin, you and I have described in the past, just his explosive power, the nastiness, the physicality of which he plays. I think that is going to add just a degree of toughness and physicality. The Seahawks, frankly, have been lacking in the interior of their offensive line. And I'll go back a year with Ola Oluwatimi and what I saw from him at the University of Michigan previously as well. Lakeland Tomlinson, again, same kind of thing. And on the defensive side of the ball, to me, everybody is going to be focusing in on bringing in a big guy like a Jonathan Hankins, or the development of a Cameron Young, what Mike Morris might be able to provide. But as we talked about before, to me, one of the toughest, nastiest guys the Seahawks have on defense is going to be the returner Uchenna Nwosu. I realize that he is not truly a defensive lineman, but I think pound for pound, he is as tough and nasty as anybody that Seattle has on their defense. And so I do think that Seattle has become tougher and nastier along the line of scrimmage, and that is the number one thing I think that they needed to do to get back to the postseason.
Our next question coming from Corey David on X. Out of the pass catchers, who do you see breaking out this season? Listen, I know that this is an answer that is going to be, there might be some listeners saying, well, that's cliche. It's already been talked about. But it's Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like, I think Jake Bobo is making his football team, but I don't see Jake Bobo having a dramatically more productive season than what he did last year. He's still going to be your number 4 receiver. You've still got Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, but Jackson Smith and Jigba, he caught another touchdown today that was spectacular along the back of the end zone. The kid just keeps showing up. The offense with Ryan Grubb, we've talked about how it fits his skill set perfectly, the ability to create after the catch, the damage he can do in the slot. He can win downfield. To me, it's Jackson Smith and Jigba, and there's nobody else that's contesting here. I guess you could say Noah Fant maybe, but Jackson Smith and Jigba, to me, is the easy selection here. And I don't see one of the guys lower on the depth chart suddenly having a breakout year like a D. Eskridge or Derek Young. The opportunities just are not going to be there. For Laviska Shenault, the same thing. I think he's going to be more of a special teams guy and a gadget player on offense, but Jackson Smith and Jigba could have a monster sophomore season. Staying in the trenches potentially here, this from DK Wookie 1, mixing in Seahawks and Star Wars here. What are areas that you think Seahawks may look at bolstering by way of trade or picking up from waivers? Could you see Bradford or Forsythe being used as part of a trade instead of being waived potentially? Rob, I know it's early, but at the same time, you know that the front office is always throwing around some of these scenarios as they lead up to training camp.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that John Schneider and his staff are going to be exhausting all opportunities out there. And we know, I mean, the Seahawks have pulled off some of these late offseason trades in the past. At the same time, I would be surprised if Seattle was able to trade any of their relatively young offensive linemen. This is, of course, coming off of a draft class that was pretty rich in offensive linemen. And I think that the vast majority of NFL teams out there that had any type of concerns there, probably address that via the draft. And so I don't think that you're going to be able to get much for a Stone Forsythe there for Anthony Bradford. And frankly, I don't think that the Seahawks want to part ways with either of those two players because both of them have shown the ability to start. They may not be in the Seahawks long-term future. That's what they're going to trying to prove that they deserve that right now. And of course, with Anthony Bradford coming off of the injury, he's a little bit behind the 8 ball in that regard. But I was encouraged by what I saw from Stone Forsythe a year ago. I was encouraged by what I saw from Anthony Bradford a year ago as well. And I do think that they have the size and the versatility to be able to be, kind of interchangeable parts in Scott Huff's offensive line here. So, long story short, of the different areas of concern that I still have for this club is at the inside linebacker position. We talked about this a couple of days ago. There are some free agents still available. I do think that because this was a relatively weak linebacker class, then some teams that are pretty rich at those positions might still have some opportunities to trade out here. But I do not see any trades at this point basically looming for Seattle.
Our next question from Depressed Alex on YouTube. What do you think Kennedy Palomalu's impact will be for the Seahawks running back? So if you follow me on X or Threads or wherever I'm on social media, you've probably seen me just gushing about Kennedy Palomalu. And it's because, listen, I coached running backs at the high school level for 7 years, not an NFL coach, not a college coach, but I took pride in coaching up my running backs, and we had a lot of really fun drills. There were some that I created myself. And watching Kennedy Palomalu in a practice, what I love about him, Rob, is he's not like a yeller. He's not somebody that's going to get in your face, but he is all business. Like, it's get a quick sip and then, next drill. Here we go. Like, this guy is constantly getting his players moving around. He was doing some really fun drills, working on chop blocks the other day. He loves to do drills where they have it's not a sled, but they have that rolling cart that you have to go under. And a lot of times offensive linemen use those and linebackers, but he's got 4 running backs coming from all 4 directions towards the middle, and they all have to cut in the middle so they avoid each other. And I absolutely loved it. It was organized chaos on the practice field. And I think this guy is an incredible football coach. You look at the track record. He's had multiple rushing yard champions. I mean, the guy is a fantastic coach, and he knows how to coach every aspect of being a running back. So I think this guy is going to be as good of an addition to this staff as anybody out there. Real quick, Rob, we got a couple fun questions from our listeners today. This one coming from David Furtado. You are a rookie getting the start for the Seahawks in week 1. What are you listening to before kickoff while suiting up?
Well, I'm an old man now, and so to compare myself to these 22, 23-year-old young men and what they might be listening to motivation. But for me, it was Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses, of course. And that is a song that always gets me excited, gets me kind of jacked up. And so if I was that player, that's definitely the song that I would be listening to as they were calling out my name to get in front of the 12s.
I've got to go with a song that we listened to when I was in high school. We had a thing. We went up in the wrestling room with our high school football team before games. And if you made a sound, like, our captains would lose their mind. Like, this was pure silence. You're sitting in there, you're getting your mind loaded, ready to go. But we always played One by Metallica, which is still my all-time favorite Metallica song. And that was one of the staples that we played in the wrestling room every time. And so that would be the one that would get me absolutely fired up, ready to play. So One by Metallica. And then our last question, this one's really fun, Rob. Is the projected starting offensive line good enough that if you were given 3 downs, you or Rob could run for positive yards against an NFL defense?
Well, maybe Corbin, who, again, if you're watching on YouTube, then you can see the picture of the big powerful legs that is the power Corbin Smith. For me, I strongly doubt it. I mean, my 0 to 60 time is like, I don't know, 60, and so it's going to be pretty damn slow. And so I don't know that I have the burst to be able to do that. I am confident, however, as I was talking about before, that I do think that Seattle is going to be able to create a little bit more push in the interior of the offensive line. That was Otimi's, Otimi's strength previously at Michigan. And that's certainly what I've seen from Christian Haynes, from Lakeland Tomlinson, and Anthony Bradford. And those, to me, are the 4 interior linemen that we need to be talking about. Their game, and every one of those players, their game is moving forward straight ahead. And I really do believe that Seattle, again, will be able to create enough push that maybe even a slow-footed, heavy-footed guy like myself might be able to scratch out a yard. Hell, Corbin, you'd be able to get from a couple of first downs. I have no doubt.
I'm not going to push it that far. If we were talking 10 years ago, maybe I can get a yard if the line has got enough push, but I can't move like I used to. So no, I think a lot of people just underestimate pro athletes and how much different they are from all of us. So yes. No, I don't think any of us talking heads. I mean, even players that were good high school players, I don't think so. That's just. Honestly, I am, I'm gushing about the compliment, but no, there's no way in hell. I guess if the line really walled things off, I maybe could get a yard. But this is the NFL we're talking about. And that however far I got, that the end result is probably going to be me on a stretcher getting carted off of the field. So anyway, I would say no for either one of those. When we come back, receivers are really breaking the bank this offseason. We have seen some crazy contracts. Justin Jefferson today setting a new record for the biggest contract ever signed by a receiver. Could that have ramifications for the Seahawks and one of their biggest stars heading towards the future? We'll be diving in up next on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. You shouldn't have to think about skipping your next mortgage payment if you want to buy tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Back in April, my wife and I went to St. Louis, Missouri, and we had a blast seeing Judas Priest. They're all in their 70s, and they still sound phenomenal. I hope I age half as well as those guys. And we had front row seats for just $75 a piece. It was awesome to see an amazing concert without having to worry about paying an arm or a leg. Game Time has deals on tickets right at the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section in a row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s that are tuning in. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Are you watching ESPN or Fox Sports on your TV daily? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting, especially if they're yelling about Caitlin Clark? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for your everyday needs to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Seahawks will be entering this season with one of the best overall receiving cores in the NFL. I don't think there's an argument that when everybody's healthy, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett, Jake Bobo, that this group stacks up favorably against any receiving core in the NFL. And for many, DK Metcalf at this stage, he is the alpha dog of this receiving core. He's got 2 years left on his current contract. And Rob, he is still the 7th highest paid receiver by annual salary in the NFL with 2 years left in his deal. So it's not like DK Metcalf is plunged down into like the 20s in terms of overall value, but it feels like NFL teams are throwing monopoly money at receivers this offseason. It has been insane. In fact, Rob, 7 different receivers in the last 2.5 months have gotten extensions worth more than $20 million per year.
Yeah, it's absolutely mind-boggling. And of course, part of this conversation is stemming off of the deal that Justin Jefferson signed, or at least was announced today with the Minnesota Vikings, signing the richest deal ever given to a non-quarterback. 4 years, $140 million, 120 of that guaranteed. And so it led to the obvious question here, is DK Metcalf going to be in line for a similar type of deal, averaging $35 million per season? It sounds, unbelievable. And yet then you look at what the current deal that DK Metcalf has with Seattle right now. It's according to Spot Track, he is due $24.5 million. It's going to be his cap hit this season. It's going to jump up to $29.5 million next season. It's going to be 10.79% of Seattle's overall cap in 2025. So would it make some sense for Seattle to extend DK Metcalf? At this point, even though that kind of goes against the nature of what John Schneider and the Seahawks have done in the past, they've typically waited until it's the last year of a player's contract, or even, of course, allowing that contract to end and then bringing them back as they did with Leonard Williams this past season. That to me is an interesting conversation. I just got to say this. I have all the respect in the world for DK Metcalf. I see him against, say, a Justin Jefferson or even a Jamar Chase, maybe even a CD Lamb in Dallas. And I don't know that DK Metcalf is quite as good. He certainly hasn't been as productive, and he's not as young as some of these other wide receivers. So to me, the $29.5 million that he is slated to get in 2025, that is about the ceiling that I ever want to go. He's going to be 28 years old when he is playing that season, again, in 2025. And so to me, that is, again, about the ceiling here, not the 35 or perhaps even north of that kind of dollars that we're seeing some of these other wide receivers throughout the NFL sign.
It feels like the contracts that we are seeing getting doled out to receivers this offseason DK Metcalf, I'm sure he's sitting. I mean, we have to remember, Rob, he's only 26. So it's not like this is an old receiver by any means. Feels like he's been in the league forever, but he's only going into his sixth season. He's 26, going to be 27 in December. Still a pretty young receiver. And the contract he signed a couple years ago, instead of a 4-year pact, going with a 3-year pact, meaning he's going to hit free agency potentially a little bit earlier. He isn't even going to be quite 28 years old when that happens. And so he absolutely has positioned himself to get a massive contract. And so I wrote an article about this today on All Seahawks and SI.com and dove into it. I think you can look sides of the court, and there are some arguments why DK Metcalf absolutely would be worth top 5 receiver money with the salary cap going up every year. And on the flip side, there's plenty of arguments against it. So I'm going to just start off with a couple reasons why I think it could make sense. If you're talking that $30 million per year price point, for one, as I said, he's 26. It's not like this is a 29, 30-year-old receiver that you're wondering he might be starting to slow down a little bit. He is still very much in the prime of his career. And the other thing is he's one of only 11 receivers in NFL history in his first 5 years to have 370 catches, over 5,300 receiving yards, and over 40 touchdowns. Only 11 guys have ever done that in NFL history. You look at the list, and they're all a bunch of studs. This big of a sample size, you are with studs like Randy Moss and AJ Green, players like that. So he's got a lofty resume that it would make some sense. You look and consider that he has the record for the single season receiving yardage for the Seahawks over Steve Largent. I mean, he has done so many great things in a Seahawks uniform, and he's done that with Tyler Lockett and now Jackson Smith and Jigba getting targets in this offense, where you can say some of those guys we just showed that have those big contracts, they don't have the second weapon behind them that's going to gobble up as many targets. So those are things you can look at. But I know on the flip side, and I'll just say this, Rob, he's barely in the top 20 the last 5 years in receptions, receiving yards. So it's not like his overall numbers stack up favorably with most of the guys we're talking about here. I mean, Justin Jefferson had over 1,000 yards in just 10 games last year. So he earned that huge contract. DK Metcalf is not on that same stratosphere as what Justin Jefferson and likely Jamar Chase are. And if he's wanting that kind of money, I think it does create a conundrum for John Schneider and the Seahawks.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think that it creates a huge conundrum because, as you said, I mean, DK Metcalf's production at his age, speaks for itself. He's in the top 10 or 11 wide receivers of all time. I think if you look at that list of top 10, top 11 wide receivers, there's not going to be an awful lot of Super Bowl champions. And that's where I think you have to kind of return back to that conversation. It doesn't matter that it's DK Metcalf or any other player. When you start talking about one player who is not a quarterback who is eating up 10% of your salary cap, I think that has to be a very, a very difficult conversation. You're going to have to be so above and beyond and really prove to be a game changer consistently. And there's no doubt a motivated, DK Metcalf can be that game changer. I was having a conversation literally with a couple of guys today about, you criticize DK Metcalf all you want. He was the guy that beat Jalen Ramsey and the LA Rams the last time you beat the LA Rams. And it was DK Metcalf basically taking that game over. You think about some of the most exciting moments of this past season when he sprints away from the Dallas Cowboys. That's DK Metcalf. And there are times where he is the best player on the field. To justify $30+ million per season, he has to be the best player on the field, a heck of a lot more in 2024. Otherwise, again, I'm going to let this contract ride out, and I'm going to try to extend him, but I'm not having the conversation about trying to break the bank the way that Justin Jefferson and I believe some other wide receivers are going to be doing here shortly.
This is kind of one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't type situations, Rob, because if Metcalf goes out and just puts up similar production to what he has done with other offensive coordinators and doesn't take that next step forward, those are still going to be really solid numbers. So he and his agent are still going to be looking to get paid. And if he goes out and he has a breakout year with 1,500, 1,600 yards, scored 12 or 13 touchdowns, then he's going to say, show me the money going into the last year of his deal. And then the Seahawks at that point might be like, man, we would have rather seen you just be that 1,100-yard guy that maybe we could still pay in the mid to high 20 million per year, not 30 million per year. So, it is one of those things. It's a good problem to have if DK Metcalf goes out and has a monster season. And it does give you a little more incentive in a league that is now much more passing oriented to give up that kind of money, especially to a player that is still several years away from being 30. But the other thing we have to consider here, and you and I know this, it seems like every year there's a bunch of stud receivers coming into the draft. It is a position that is flush with talent coming into the league from the college level. The emphasis of 7-on-7. This is a position that just keeps churning out stud players. And so there is going to come a point where there's going to be some teams like, you know what? And we've already seen this with the Chiefs, and we're not going to pay Tyreek Hill. We're going to trade him over to the Dolphins. They can give him a contract. Devontae Adams, we're going to trade you to the Raiders. We are seeing some teams already start to do that because we're talking low starting quarterback money that is going to these receivers. And so it does create a situation where as long as this fire keeps running hot, eventually somebody's got to throw some water on this a little bit and say, enough's enough. I got to pay other positions on my roster. I've got a quarterback to pay. I'm not paying $35 million a year for a wide receiver. So we shall have to wait and see. But certainly these contracts, any stud receiver, including DK Metcalf, you're licking your lips thinking, hey, I'm going to get another big payday here. The Seahawks have to figure out where he fits into their future here and what price point they consider to maybe be their ceiling. And we'll find that out sooner or later here as he nears the end of his contract. He's still got 2 years left of his deal, so it may be a while till we have these contract discussions start coming up. Anyway, as always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow for our Tuesday show, we're going to start taking a deep dive in some of the competitions to watch as we head towards minicamp. We're going to start seeing full rosters out on the practice field soon. Start looking at some of those fun competitions as we draw closer to minicamp and head towards training camp as well. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and thanks for listening in. Go Hawks.